there! For those of you who have been here a while, you may remember that I've been saying for the past few months that I want to do my wrap-up in 2 parts, and I keep forgetting to do it, and my wrap-ups are getting really long. So this month I am actually doing 2 parts, and this is the first part of my August wrap-up. So the first 2 books I read this month are books I no longer have physical copies of. The first one was my library pick for the month, which has now gone back to the library, which was Truman Capote's Complete Short Stories. And I don't know if complete is completely true. I don't know if this was all the short stories he ever wrote, but this is like a sweeping. It goes through about 15 years, and it just sort of goes through his writing career. What was interesting for me with this, and I really did love this, I love Truman Capote's writing. He also wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's, which I have read and really enjoyed. But the thing that I found interesting with this is that I liked the stories at the start, I loved the stories in the middle, and I kind of went off the stories at the end. I felt like he was struggling a bit, and you could tell, and he was reusing characters, and I was just feeling a bit lost with all the stories towards the end. But the middle of this was really good for me. There was an excellent story in there about a woman who goes to a man who buys her dreams off of her, and he ends up obviously taking a lot more than she was anticipating. And there's another story about, it's a competition where you have to guess how many coins are in a jar, and it's about a man who goes back every day and just stares at this jar, and it's sort of whether he can actually guess or whether he's just a bit crazy. And there's some really interesting stories. I think what Truman Capote does very well is that he is very good at character studies and building interesting characters in a very subtle and lovely way, and I would definitely recommend his writing if you have not read him. And then I also read on my Kindle, because I got it from NetGalley, In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This is a memoir that's quite hard-hitting about life in North Korea, and it also follows Yeonmi's journey to get out of North Korea and to go to China, where she ends up getting taken into the sex industry, and it all gets a bit out of the saucepan into the fire situation, and eventually her journey to America and her present day situation. She's younger than me, she's only 23 I think, which is absolutely insane when you consider the things she has been through. And what really shines through in this is Yeonmi's pure determination and her desire to live, which is really nice. And when she gets access to all the books that she never had access to and the education that she never had a chance to have, she just devours it. So it's a very inspirational book, but it's also quite hard-hitting. I didn't know that much about North Korea before reading this, and I'm definitely going to look into it more. The only thing I would say with this book, and what stopped it getting 5 stars, it was only a 4-star, more a 3.5 for me, is that understandably it's quite difficult for Yeonmi to relive a lot of the things, especially in terms of the sex trade industry that she ended up being involved in. And I felt for that reason that a lot of things were skimmed over, and I could have done with more information. And there was actually a really scathing review on Goodreads that said that basically Yeonmi was just this rich Korean girl who is just making a big song and dance about a situation that wasn't actually that bad. And as much as that's just not relevant, I think I can see why somebody would think that, because a lot of the things weren't, the pure horror of some of the things weren't exactly explored. Like the part where she's involved in the sex trade is quite skimmed over, and she almost puts a rosy tint on it, and I don't know whether that's what was actually happening or whether that was just the way she finds it easiest to remember. I think probably the latter. I mean, she ended up, in terms of being in the sex trade, she ended up in probably one of the most privileged positions that she could have been in, because she ended up being the mistress of the head man. But even so, she was 14 years old, and it's just horrendous. But yes, the North Korean aspect of this was fascinating. It was like reading a dystopian novel. It's just baffling. And I mean, it's like Yeonmi was saying at the time, she thought that was okay. Like, it wasn't horrendous. She thought that was how life was. And it wasn't until she got out to the other side that she realised that actually that's not how life is. But then at the same time, I felt there needed to be more development, because obviously she must have had problems with it to want to escape in the first place. But it's a really nice starter point, and it's definitely got me interested on that path of reading. I then read Miranda July's novel The First Bad Man. I recently read Nobody Belongs Here More Than You, Miranda July's short story collection, and absolutely loved it. I devoured it. I've since reread it, which I never do, but I loved it that much. And this is her first novel, and I was very excited to get it and had to read it straight away. I have to say I didn't love this as much. Now, that might partially be because I read it over a long period of time. It took me about a week to get through it, and it's not the thickest. I just kind of didn't feel in the place to read at that time, so that didn't help. I do like this. but I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to everybody like I did with her short story collection, because I don't think this is going to be everybody's cup of tea. If you're familiar with Miranda July's work, you will know that she's kind of a dramatic futurist, I suppose. She's very much about this doom and gloom idea of a person's future and of a person, and I really like that person. It's probably not for everybody. This is a very bizarre novel about a woman who ends up looking after her, I don't even know what relation this girl has to her. It's her work colleague's daughter, I think. And they end up getting into a bit of a strange situation where they play fight with each other, and it gets a bit erotic. I don't know how to say more than that without spoiling this. There's a baby involved that is a sort of manifestation of all the babies that this woman has ever come across and ever felt a connection to, and it all gets a bit bizarre. And also the lady in there goes to the doctor a lot and talks about a lump in her throat that comes when she feels distressed, and he calls it globus hystericus, I think. And I did watch an interview with Miranda July, and she said that she went to the doctors and they actually diagnosed that for her once. But it's enjoyable and it's fun, and if you're familiar with Miranda July and you like what she does, I think you would enjoy this. Try not to go into it too seriously. I think that's the trick with this. It's intelligent and it's funny. It's kind of nice for somebody who's having a bit of a life crisis, I think. Enjoyable. Then I read Vampires in the Lemon Grove by Karen Russell. This is another short story collection for me. I'm breaking the boundaries this month. I had two. I'm just kind of craving short stories at the moment, and I'm really enjoying all the collections I'm reading. I loved this. I gave it 5 stars because other than one story, the others are fantastic. There is a story in here, obviously the title story, about vampires who quench their bloodthirst by sucking on lemons. There is a story about girls who turn into silkworms and cocoon themselves in silk. There is a story about American presidents coming back as horses and turning into a bit of an Animal Farm situation. It's just a fantastic, fantastic collection, and I really enjoyed it. I'm really looking forward to reading Karen Russell's other collection because I've heard this is her least popular one. And a lot of the people on the reviews said that they didn't think that she was very good at finishing her stories. I have to say I can't remember either way, but I certainly didn't feel like sometimes, especially when I read someone like Raymond Carver, the end is just like, oh, okay. Whereas with this, I didn't get that feeling at all, so I wouldn't say that that was something I experienced with it. I really enjoyed it. I loved the writing style. Her writing is really rich, and I cannot wait to read more of her. And finally, I finished The Girl of Ink and Stars by Kieran Milrod Hargrave. Firstly, this is a beautiful, beautiful book. I think a lot of time has gone into the production of this, and it is lovely. I mean, I don't know if you can see the pattern on the pages there. That's on every page. I mean, it is a beautiful thing, but for me, I really didn't enjoy this. I gave it 2 stars. I just did not enjoy it. It felt very much like a first draft that needed an awful lot of editing. For me, what really let this down was the world building just wasn't there, so the credibility wasn't there. So the characters' actions just, to me, seemed unrealistic and rushed and silly. I don't know whether you would enjoy this more if you're into mythology and you know about mythology. There are things in here which is basically, it goes into sort of myths towards the end, and I think they are true myths, but to me this just, as I say, the world wasn't built up. This basically follows the story of a village which has been taken over by this overpowering mayor. We don't really find out why or how he is overpowering, just that he is overpowering, and a girl ends up dying and he doesn't do anything about it, so the people of the street have to break this curfew that we're never really told about and go out searching for the killers. And his daughter, who is friends with our main character Isabella, ends up going in search of the girl herself. And then, of course, the mayor goes on this big expedition. Isabella cuts off all her hair, pretends she's a boy, and goes with him. To me, this just skimmed the surface of a story. It just wasn't enough. I didn't feel like there was enough depth in it. I needed it to go further into the world, further into the explanation of what was going on, because most of the time I just lost interest completely because I didn't know. I didn't like it one bit, I'm afraid. I don't know if I was necessarily the perfect audience for this because I'm not a child, but I also don't know anything about myths, and I think that was probably the main issue between me and this book. Even if I had known about myths, I don't know if I could have got past the issues because that wasn't the only thing that was bothering me. I also didn't like the fact that Isabella, in order to go on this journey and be a hero, although actually she does nothing, she had to cut off her hair and become boy-like and disguise herself as a boy. Firstly, I think that's been done. Secondly, I think it's damaging. There's nothing wrong with girls being heroes and being able to go on adventures. You don't need to masculinise them in order for that to be feasible. There was many issues. I personally wouldn't recommend, but as I say, I think give it a go if you're into myths. You'll probably get more out of this than I did. So that's everything I read for the first half of this month, and I will let you know how the rest of my reading goes in my second part of my wrap-up. Bye!